we bought 2 red rocking chairs for the front porch of the church. Years ago, I read an article giving a strong theological argument for a front porch. And going back and trying to find the article, I found numerous articles thinking about how the front porch builds community. In one local article written by Paul Spicer said, "Front porches are powerful. They call us outside of ourselves. They're a catalyst for community connections, neighbors and strangers alike in Richmond." Many people once lived in homes with front porches like we can find in the Fan or older homes that are close to a city sidewalk. Neighbors would walk by and would greet each other even if names were never exchanged. Folks may pay a visit with a cup of coffee or tea on the porch. And yes, it was also made you a sitting duck if someone came by that you did not want to visit with. And our gospel speaks about that today. When a lawyer asks Jesus a question, Jesus wants to give the attorney an easy response about the law, since that is his expertise. And Jesus congratulates him on the answer that comes from the most basic of Jewish prayers, called the Shema, which summarizes the 10 Commandments, taken from Deuteronomy 6, to love God, and from Leviticus 19, to love one's neighbor. I imagine if these 2 were just sitting in rocking chairs together, Jesus would give the lawyer a high five or a fist bump or a pat on the shoulder and say, "Good job." But next comes the question to really try to stump Jesus. He asks, "And who is my neighbor?" This is the question we should always ask as ambassadors of God's grace in our community, in the nation, and in the world. There's a modern-day conflict in the world that sheds light to our gospel context today. New Testament scholar and Bishop N.T. Wright wrote how hundreds of years before Jesus' time was the prevalent hatred between Jews and Samaritans. And I quote, "This is still and tragically in the smoldering tensions between Israel and Palestine today, with each side seeing themselves as the rightful owners of the land promised to Abraham. It's in this tension that Jesus begins a parable to show that through the power of God's grace, even enemies can see each other as neighbors." Who are our neighbors? Next door to the church is the School of World Religion Studies program for VCU. Maybe a conversation on our front porch with those neighbors could spark conversations about these religious tensions and perspectives. Yet as people wanted to find more and more privacy, that's when porches began to move to the back. It has encouraged a neighbor selectiveness. There we could choose which neighbors we wanted to be in relationship with. There we could miss those who were walking by on our streets, or even those who have maybe fallen and are hurt in the ditches. It's in the gospel today when the lawyer, the speaker of a group, tried to entrap Jesus in a public setting. And Jesus instead approaches his response as if the 2 were sitting down on a front porch asking questions from one neighbor to the next, and to ponder a parable, a made-up, a hypothetical story together to see if they can find greater truth. You see, if we sit, not focused on perceptions of facts that might define our neighbors, instead, if we sit to listen to stories of how God might be speaking to us and through us with our neighbors, we can find a greater truth. Parables gave factless grounds within recognized scenarios in order to be engaged in conversation and maybe for God to teach us. So imagine Jesus slowly rocking in his chair as he starts the Good Samaritan parable. The true background is that the road from Jerusalem down to Jericho descends more than 3,300 feet in less than 20 miles. It is steep, it has lots of turns, and therefore lots of places for someone to hide and surprise a passerby. This trip was, and still is today, known for people being jumped, robbed, and hurt. Now, the lawyer, likely nodding his head, knew of this dangerous route where many were left for dead. If you find yourself on that road, it's best to keep your head down and just keep walking. He also knew that the purity laws meant that a priest should not get one's hands dirty by helping someone, whether they're half dead or fully dead. You see, in some respects, the law protected and promoted for the priest and the Levite to walk on by. But then Jesus throws a surprise into the story as the enemy becomes the hero. Samaritans were the avoided kind, the reason why you might build a back porch. Yet it is the Samaritan who stopped, gave out of his own safety, time, and financial means in order to help this neighbor in need. In this parable, mercy overcame the law. Again, N.T. Wright gives us insight about the lawyer. For him, God is the God of Israel, and neighbors are Jewish neighbors. For Jesus, Israel's God is the God of grace for the entire world, and a neighbor is anyone in need. So Jesus might lean back in his chair and say, "Go and do likewise." A difficult challenge then, a difficult challenge now. So we bought 2 red rocking chairs for the front porch of the church. I tried them twice this past week. I got a couple of smiles, 1 hello, and even 1 comment of those who passed by. Perhaps in this simple act, we can become a place of wanting to know our neighbors. And remembering this is not a new concept. If we think back to COVID times, many made the push to happen out of our desire to have human connection by meeting in front yards, out in spaces in the open. Maybe you might come here one day and just sit in those chairs and to see who you might meet. Maybe you might find a time to sit in your own front yard or a place where you're on vacation, recognizing that in such an uncomfortable situation is the call for God's grace to come and be amongst us, inviting God's grace in so that we can be connected to whoever those neighbors are that pass by, and then to see what stories might unfold, to see what we might learn from each other. Amen.